Professor at University of Massachusetts Lowell from 2013 to 2018 and is now an independent researcher and consultant. She received her PhD in psychology from University College of London in 2009, followed by 4 years of postdoctoral training at Washington University in St. Louis. The broad goal of her research has been to help students make the most of their academic experience. Yana's research interests is improving the accuracy of memory performance and the judgments students make about their cognitive functions. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Dr. Yana Weinstein. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Before that, I was very much in academia, so doing a lot of research. And then now my focus is more on implementing that, trying to help teachers and talk to teachers and talk to others who are involved in education to try to see how these strategies that I've been working on in research can be actually applied in education. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And so if I was going to be really boring and introduce myself, I might say, I apply cognitive psychology to education. And so then if I want to say it a bit more, everyday language and actually something that makes sense, my goal is to help students study more effectively. But what I've discovered is that I, myself, can't really reach that many students. Like there were the students that I taught, but if I produce a website with lots of study strategies on it, which I happen to do, students are not going to actually flock to it because that's not something that particularly is maybe not of interest, or maybe they don't know it's out there, maybe they don't want to engage with it because it's a little bit maybe too academic, or I, from my place of older and I might think I'm cool and hip and know how to make things that are interesting to teenagers and college students, but really I don't, as my teenage kids tell me all the time. So I try to do that, and I'm going to be doing it via teachers and school psychologists like you and principals, people who have direct access, also parents, right? So people who have direct access to kids and college students, but who are themselves adults, and so a little bit more inclined to engage with these materials and then maybe translate them for their own audience, right? So I talk to teachers all the way from kindergarten through to instructors of college students, and then they will be using the strategies in very different ways. So I started actually researching false memory, so I was really fascinated by the idea that sometimes we can think that we remember something, or can be really convinced that we remember something, whereas in actual fact it never happened, or it happened in a different way, and there's evidence to show it happened in a different way. But to us, it seems like it really happened the way we remember it. And so you might be very confident in a memory, but that doesn't translate to accuracy. And I was interested in this first from an eyewitness testimony perspective, right? Because a lot of the time that is used as evidence, and then it turns out it wasn't actually accurate. But we as humans are inclined to believe, confident memory. If someone says, I'm sure I remember this, we think, oh yeah, that's quite persuasive. But actually, memory is so malleable, and that's something I'm going to be talking about more, which is the extent to which memory is really not fixed or necessarily accurate. And then now, over the last 10 years, I've been thinking about how that applies to education, right? Because we think we're just going to teach the kids something and then they'll remember it. But memory is so much more complex than that. So I did that, but after about 7 years of doing research on it, I realized that it would be much more interesting to actually apply it, or do research and apply it, because I was doing applied research, but it was just going in journals called the Journal of Applied Research, which wasn't really what I meant. I meant that I wanted it to be applied. And so that's when I started doing these kinds of science communication exercises, workshops, there's a website, videos, and things like that to try to get the word out and try to get people using the strategies that we're researching. And then the cool thing is that we can get feedback from teachers about this strategy that you recommended really doesn't work in the classroom, so there's not much point in you continuing to do research on it this way because we're never going to use it. And then we can change what we do from a research perspective. And so, just to recap, the first thing that's important is figuring out what the research says about effective study strategies, right? But that's all well and good. It's useless unless you actually communicate about what those strategies are and tweak them as well based on feedback from people who really are in the classroom. And so my hope is by propagating this information via networks that we can get effective strategies into more schools and also from a younger age. Because what is really difficult is that when students come to university and they haven't necessarily learned the way to study that's effective, and then it's I won't want to say too late, but it's more difficult to change habits at that point. So the earlier the strategies, are learned, the better. We always ask the question why something works and also why it doesn't work, and that's particularly important. Like if we tried something out with one group of students and then we tried it out again in a similar way with another group, why did it not work the second time? And when we ask these questions, we're particularly interested in the cognitive processes. So why didn't it work? Could it be that this task did not have them think about it in this particular way, or did not have them remember the information that we want them to remember? And that way we can tweak the strategies so that they work, across as many groups as possible. So unfortunately, psychology isn't like a hard science. It's certainly not math, and there are no laws, like, in physics you can have laws of gravity or whatever. Instead, we just have flexible guiding principles. So they are, general findings that tend to hold in most cases. There may be exceptions, but the exceptions are much, much fewer. And if you're thinking like, oh, that's not how I learn, and that's not, actually that's generally an illusion. All of us do learn in the way that I'm going to tell you, because it's a very, very broad conception of learning. And importantly though, how do we get this information, and how do we get to the point where we can make recommendations for schools and teachers and so on and so forth? Because we wouldn't want to make them based on just one finding. And what's really important here is that we start from a basic level where we're really just doing controlled experiments in a lab, and we just try and figure out a strategy that is effective, and then we replicate. So we do it again many times with different types of material, with different types of students to see if it works. And then we go along to the applied level. And what I mean by that is that we are still in the lab, so we're still in this contrived environment. It's not a real school, it's not a real educational setting, but now the material that we're giving students to study is actually something they might be tested on in real life. And then finally, when we see that something's working, and we see this working like 100 times, this takes decades, by the way, then we move into the field and actually go into the classroom. And the reason why we wait so long is because going into the classroom is going to be expensive, and it's also going to be time consuming, and we don't want to waste teacher and student time on a new intervention that we don't know if it's going to work or not, right? So by the time we get to the field and we test out the strategies, we're fairly confident they're going to work, but then still some things might be different in the environment. There's a lot going on, right? It's a messy science. But now we're at the point where we're communicating them and also finessing them to work with different groups of students as well. So the basic principles are going to work for all students, but the exact way the strategy is presented and the content of it is going to differ for every student, but also for specific groups as well. So what are these basic guiding principles about learning? It comes from the fact that I was interested in false memory, right? So if false memory can exist, then what that means is that not all memory is going to be accurate, even when we feel that it is. And so the first principle that's going to be important is that as soon as you learn something, or as soon as you have mastered it, even though it seems like you've completely learned it, you immediately actually start to forget it. And this is kind of counterintuitive, because in schools we often talk about mastery as being a good thing, right? So we want to bring kids up to mastery, and then there might be some quiz, and if they look like they're getting it, and they got it, and then after that we're sort of pleased, and then we move on to the next thing. But what actually happens at mastery is that that's just one moment in time, and then the next moment in time, unless they're still repeating the exercise, they've already started to forget it. And that can be represented in what's called the forgetting curve. So what this shows is memory ability, or performance, let's just say, on any learning task. And let's say that dot at the top, that one up here is 100%. So let's say you have mastered some task and you're at 100%. Well, as time goes on, you very rapidly forget how to do it, even if you're at 100%. And so the only way to really maintain that is to keep practicing it, right? You can't always be practicing everything, but in order to maintain this mastery, it needs to be practiced. That it's really not fixed, and it's not a case of like, a memory is like a book and then the pages fade. That's not what forgetting means. It's much more malleable than that, It's forgetting mixed in with bringing other information in, because it's all networks, right? And so this is really probably the most important principle, which is that every time you retrieve or remember something, you then reconstruct it. It gets activated and it's altered. So that pattern of activation gets activated, and at that point it's very malleable and flexible, and it gets altered. Memory is not like a library or computer, and I've already definitely hinted at that from my false memory examples. Everything. As I said before, with social emotional learning as well, this isn't just for learning nonsense syllables, but it is going to work with vocabulary, it's going to work with just individual facts, also passages of text, and I'm going to show you an example using text passages, but also skills like problem solving. So this isn't memory of facts versus skills. That's another false dichotomy. Everything involves some skill, some facts. It's a continuum. Motor skills, and I would say also emotional skills. Anything physical that students have to learn, again, spaced practice is going to be better. And even, for example, musical instrument learning, so my anecdote. Essentially, there's planning, and this is just the way that I've sort of conceived of it. This isn't an official definition, but I think of it as planning for learning, so when learning is going to take place. And that's where spacing comes into it, and what I was going to show next, which is interleaving. But it's really just a subset of spacing. But the main concept is, this is like the when question, right? Like when is a thing's going to be studied? It's not just mastery and moving on, it's giving opportunities for reviewing things, right? And then the next obvious question is how, right? When and how. And so that was, maybe I just went too quickly through that slide, but that was reinforcement of learning. And again, like this isn't a formal framework. This is just the way that I've thought about it based on the strategies that we know. And so the reinforcement part is going to be really just practicing retrieving information from memory. And that's going to be, it all ties in. So that's going to be with spacing. Retrieval of information, and that's essentially practice, right? And then what we'll talk about in the afternoon, and this is more if we have time, is developing understanding. And these are additional strategies that can be used, but the whole kind of basis is planning and reinforcing. And then these additional strategies, like elaboration, asking how and why questions, and dual coding, which is putting pictures with words, and good use of concrete examples, all of that is useless if you're not doing this. So this is the basis. And then these are additional strategies that have been shown to be effective in promoting memory. So elaboration, dual coding, and concrete examples.